Hey guys, Harv here, and welcome back to Space Tourism. Today we have a very special mission in store. This is the series where we take rich celebrity Kerbals out to the far reaches of the solar system and entertain them in any way possible. Now, with mission assigned title Lathe, we were more on the relaxation side of things. However, with the starting of Series 2 and the eventual progression onto building a base on Vall, we now realise that our purpose has become much more exciting. For Lathe may have been relaxation on the beach, but Vall is something very different. A harsh, icy environment, which will take skill, courage and determination to battle with. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present our first attempt to capture the anomaly. Yes, you heard me right. We have determined that the anomaly is in fact perhaps one of the biggest hindrances to our progress of of tourism on Vall. So we're going to try and analyze it. Yes, we're going to take it for analyzing. Which is why, ladies and gentlemen, we have brought this weird looking machine out here to the vast reaches of the solar system. Now you can see, using these equi-spaced struts, we will place down and hover over the contraption in order to try and pick up one of these weird stone tablets and to analyze it for future reference. So coming in, bringing ourselves over, using our pilot's unique and extremely skilled piloting skills, we shall bring it down and promptly hit the ground, fall over and crash into the side of it. Yeah, we'll fire him later, okay? We'll fire that guy later. It's fine, don't worry about it. In fact, our real purpose here isn't necessarily to actually capture one of these things, because hey, they're part of the map and you can't exactly do that. But we do want to get this thing over it. So without further ado, we shall return to the vehicle assembly building and come back once and for all, building our second craft named Scaffold. You know what, that's enough of the dramatic music actually. Let's have something a bit more calm and peaceful and magical. Yes, there's no point hyping up over this. Let's just talk reasonably now. I am in fact sane. Though you may not have realised that I am in fact the sane person, so I should probably stop with all the nonsensical ranting. So today we are doing something very special. As I've pointed out, or as I've hinted to, Vall is going to be quite different in its nature from how Lathe was. Lathe was very much a beachside relaxation resort because we built a base there and didn't really do anything else. But on Vall we have low gravity, on Vall we have all sorts of different magical wonders that could behold us. And so we want to make use of its low gravity, its lack of atmosphere. We want to make use of all these various different environmental characteristics of the moon. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to present Roller Coaster Resort. Vall. Home to all sorts of different exciting ventures for the Kerbals to partake in, such as skimming over the ice lakes. This is in fact preview footage, this is not the actual ride, but there will be something to do with skimming extremely fast over the large flat plain, because it's quite an interesting experience. It looked quite nice, I thought. So anyway, after getting this all the way out here, we didn't actually take this out to the far reach of the solar system, we merely are doing a simulation. Yes, this episode is very much a simulation, because I don't actually do anything legitimately in this one. I didn't have an awful lot of time to record it. So, unfortunately, the attempts of our second pilot, having fired the first one to try and fit our scaffolding, as I've called it, over one of these stone tablets, are not going particularly well. The reason, you may be wondering, the reason I want to put something like this over there in the first place is because I want some sort of support. This environmental characteristic, as I've said, low gravity, means that by nature if you have any sort of roller coaster on the ground, it's going to probably tumble around a little bit, so having some way of rooting it to the ground would be fantastic. Now we could use a mod, we could use, I'm sure, Kethane or something as some way to root yourself into the ground, but the game does too. I'm a solid believer, and this is why I don't use mods, I'm a solid believer that with any amount of ingenuity you can find ways around different problems. So, how do we find purchase on the ground without using some sort of mod, where we find bits of the ground that are uneven, bits of the ground that are suitable to build on, bits of the ground such as this anomaly. Now this has given me a very interesting idea for the structure of this series. There are roughly, what, maybe 8 of these rectangular tablets, and there's about 5 of the pyramids. 8 rectangular tablets. What if we gave each one a different purpose, created a different ride on each one? So without further ado, it is my pleasure to present a merry-go-round. Yeah, a merry-go-round. Sounds a bit tame, doesn't it? Nope. Absolutely not. This is the merry-go-round of death! The merry-go-round of excitement and rollercoaster and rock and roll! I don't have any royalty-free rock and roll music, but if I did, I would have put some on at this point. In fact, those of you who have watched my previous videos may recognize this as more than just a merry-go-round. In fact, this thing started out life in the hands of Meticulous Mitch. This is a helicopter, and this was created a very, very, very long time ago. Several, if not dozens of months ago, which would be about a year. It might actually have been a year ago. No, it wasn't. But basically, Meticulous Mitch created the helicopter, and he used a bearing comprised of landing gear. And I took that concept and applied it to my artificial gravity love, and created this, a space station. Now you can see how this turns into a ride from this footage here. Also, you can hear me talking in the background, which is quite funny. So I created next a artificial gravity space station using this to spin round Kerbals at high velocities, creating a centrifuge. And years later, the Kerbals have adapted this old technology which was lost and forgotten about in their space program, and are now putting it to the slightly more mundane task of entertaining rich and wealthy Kerbals. However, it has always been my intention to use my artificial gravity technology again in the series at some point. At the start of Series 1, I was talking about interplanetary transfer vessels for tourists, you know, the utmost comfort in artificial gravity. Never actually materialized. Perhaps that hope will be revitalized once more in this second series. So, we've created our artificial gravity merry-go-round, and we have now got the task before us of using it on Vall. Now, as I've said, if we could use each one of those roughly 8 tablets for a different purpose, it would be quite a nice structure to the series. So redefining our scaffolding based on the measurements we took when we managed to get it successfully onto one of the tablets, I've created this using panels rather than struts. We have ladders leading up the side. Hopefully this ought to be the right size. However, before we send it out to Vall, of course we need to test it first. So, a bit of nostalgia for you who enjoyed the Artificial Gravity series. We start up our engines, and the way you get this bearing to work is that you open up the landing gear that close around it, and then you open them and at the same time detach the bearings so they become 2 separate entities. And this allows it to spin in its holding within the wheels, without being part of the same entity, and yet, because the wheels are placed such that they have a good strong hold on the bearing, it remains within. And in fact you can even use physics warp and you'll still have it clenched tightly in this series of wheels. You can't use time warp though, which was the problem. The one problem I pointed out after doing my artificial gravity space station using this bearing was that you can't time warp, because otherwise the slight differences in velocity between this spinning contraption we have here and the actual scaffolding itself per se, the slight differences in velocity there mean that over the course of hundreds of years as you time warp, they drift apart. Nothing's stopping them, there's no collision, there's no physics going on to keep them there, because time warp prevents all of those calculations in order to speed up time along an on-rails system. So, how do we get round that problem? Well, for us here in space tourism, as of this moment, it isn't really a problem, but in the future it will be, because I do want to use my artificial gravity technology, as I've said. Now, a way to get round the problem, perhaps, would be to have it redock. Become one vessel again, because it starts out as one vessel, it undocks and gets supported solely by the bearings, and then perhaps we can redock the bearings together. Now, previous attempts to do this haven't gone particularly well, but there's no reason why, in theory, with enough technology and enough RCS systems and advanced controls and different mechanics, that it would not be possible. They can't redock immediately, and that's the one reason why it's allowed to spin, because you have to be a certain distance apart, or have done time acceleration in order for the magnets to reattach. But there are many different ways and many different ideas of how we could potentially make that a thing, and if we do make it a thing, then we will open up new routes of technology for our series. So, experimenting with actually trying to land this thing. It's entertaining, but the experimentation doesn't go particularly well. You saw there that I was constantly turning on and off hack gravity in order to try and simulate a Vall, and I think that these two engines here that I've hastily bolted onto the side will have enough thrust for the low gravity environment of Vall, but on Kerbal they certainly don't. Though it is quite entertaining to watch them. In fact, panels, you'll be surprised at the lack of explosions, and that's because panels have quite a high structural integrity. They really do like bouncing around rather than exploding in smithereens. So anyway, back to the drawing board, we decided to add on a few more engines and other various bits and pieces in order to try and up the thrust somewhat, without compromising our actual efficiency too much. I did this because we were recording on a live stream and I thought that better safe than sorry. You know, it's better to add on more engines rather than to... I mean, if we know it doesn't work on Kerbal, then there is still a chance that it won't work on Vall despite the lowered gravity, so better safe than sorry, at least make it more likely to work. So, having hyper-edited our warp drive, artificial merry-go-round, out to Vall, it looks like a spaceship. It looks so cool. I was just here and I just thought, oh man, look at that. Because all the panels and the circular and the engines mounted on the sides and the different shape and the diamond kind of structure and the fuel lines, and it looks so cool. It's a shame it's going to be put to use as merely a merry-go-round, though we will hopefully be doing something more in the future. But anyway, using our various different illegal methods, we get this thing out to Vall. Now we are purely doing a simulation, of course we are, for the actual mission, going to have to carry this thing here. And that might be a bit awkward considering, well, it's quite awkwardly placed. There are different ways we could do it. We don't have to take it all as one piece, we could separate the two different vessels and then try and redock them at the site. But that would require 2 feats of VTOL action because, you know, in order to get the scaffolding on top of the tablet we have to drop it up and on top. And in order to get the... from there, in order to get the artificial merry-go-round on top of the scaffolding, we'd have to lift it and drop it on top again. So it might be better just to keep it as one vessel for the time being. Of course this makes it quite big and unwieldy, but we, with some care, should be able to do it. Now instead of doing a VTOL action in the first place, of course we could try and put some rover wheels on the base. We could try and drive this thing over the tablet. I don't think that's going to work. Perhaps we could try and invent some sort of system to lift it up and place it over rather than using rockets and trying to balance on our exhaust gases. There's a few different ideas. If you have any suggestions, then I would appreciate them being put in the comments or being tweeted at me at HOCgamer. But here, right now in the present, I decide that I might as well try simply using the VTOL method. However, before we go into doing that, I'm going to land this thing a little while away, so that, you know, for starters, I have a quick save location. So we get this thing down on the ground, and it lands quite nicely. I'm surprised that it didn't tip over, seeing as it is so long and top heavy. So we quick save there on the ground, and before even putting this on the tablet, despite how appealing the idea of that series structure is, we're going to see if this can function without using the anomaly at all. So I turn off these outside engines, and soon enough I shall be activating the merry-go-round engines, like so. Burn both to keep it from having any resultant force, and then I shall detach the gears, detach the bearing, and allow it to spin freely. Then, turning off one of the engine directions, it begins to spin. This is on 1/3 total throttle, without any sort of stabilization, without any anchoring to the ground, without anything to stop it from falling over. And yet, the landing gear have such little friction in their wheel braking, whatever the correct terminology there is. There's such little rotational friction that very little oscillation is caused by this thing spinning round massively. And in fact now we're actually on 100% thrust, and still it functions fine. Now of course, this is a best case scenario. We're down on the ground. I believe that in fact unbreakable joint is actually turned on, though that won't really have any effect on this. I'm sure that isn't imparting on the success of this mission here. But other things will be imparting on the success of the mission. For example, when we have Kerbals on the merry-go-round, they might not be placed evenly. Jebediah may have eaten more cookies than Bill. You know, they could have different weights. And so the mass round the rim of the merry-go-round won't be equal on all sides. So there's going to be different things, different reasons why it would be a good idea to have some sort of stabilization. And you see me here desperately trying to waggle the thing around to get it back in its bearing slot. This is me trying to redock it back onto the scaffolding to form one piece, you know, for transportation. And it works! Just by moving it around using the gear to like pummel it into place, I managed to actually get it to land properly on the thing and to get redocked, which in my opinion was pretty much pot luck. I don't think that that's going to be a reliable method of getting it to work in the future, but still it's promising. So we turn our engines back on and we turn off the merry-go-round engines, and now it's time to try and place it over one of our anomaly statues, to see whether we got the measurements right, to see whether it'll work in the first place, my idea of stabilization. Or maybe the game will reject my idea and simply explode all the panels that come into contact with it. Who knows? So it's time to start floating it over. And this was fairly late in the evening. I was getting quite tired and I wasn't really in the mood to take things seriously. So I either do overly careful movements, or I get frustrated and do not so careful movements. Right now, I'm trying to come to terms with which way is up and which way is down and left and right and forwards and backwards, because there's nothing to really... I don't even know what vessel I'm controlling at this point. I'm being that incompetent. I'm not really paying attention to how my flying should be going, and so every movement is calm and careful, until I get bored and decide, you know what, I'm just going to fly this thing over here and it can deal with it. And of course, the Kerbal space program is a simulator, so just telling it to deal with it is not going to make it particularly happy. Also, I'd like to point out at this point that you notice in the left my fuel is about to run out. It does so, and I quickly turn on infinite fuel. Which is a bit worrying, considering that I used this fuel, I tried to use it realistically, you know, to land and then to transport it over onto our surface. Admittedly, a lot of it was wasted doing careful movements, not quite like this, crash, bang, wallop. But a lot of it was wasted trying to move over to here. But still, even so that a lot of it was wasted and it won't necessarily be wasted to such a degree, it's still worrying that we have so little fuel. Perhaps something to think about in the future. We may need to up the amount of fuel we bring with us on this stage, making it heavier and so harder to transport to Vall. There's a lot of things that are going to be happening in the next few episodes. However, for this one, we are pretty much finished. It lands on its head and I decide, you know what, I'm going to try and end this show with a bang and let's get it to destroy itself spontaneously. In fact, that doesn't quite happen, and in fact it actually does something that's quite fun. I start spinning the merry-go-round on its head, and actually, well, I mean, there's one explosion, but other than that, it's quite okay, really. Spinning round, doing some acrobatics. I reckon that'll be a good ride in its own half, until the mass gets non-evenly distributed and it starts spinning more like a gyroscope, and at this point things start breaking off. Things start bending and flexing in all sorts of different positions. I decided to retract the landing gear because I thought it might be quite funny. And so we can end with this beautiful view of something that no doubt cost a lot of money to create being needlessly destroyed on the surface of Vall. But don't worry, it was all a simulation. I wonder if people will get annoyed at me saying that. I do say it quite often. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen, this episode of Space Tourism. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it. If you did like the video, then please do like the video. Thanks again for watching, and I shall see you all next time.